This is episode 10 of the Relentless Man podcast, Finding Your Craft. Welcome to the Relentless Man podcast. I am your host, Christian Mojaiso. My goal is to help men die empty, to make sure that you die having used up every ounce of potential that is trapped within you. However, to help you die empty, I will have to be very raw and brutally honest with you. So if you're easily offended, stop listening. If you're easily triggered, stop listening. If you can't handle explicit language, stop listening. If you are fragile, stop listening. Otherwise, let's dig in. Today we have Collin, a friend of mine, Collin Blinder. We went to school together at Pitt College. He just graduated, and we're going to be discussing various issues. The most important one today is finding your craft. And Collin has a bunch of questions for me. We'll be having a discussion here and going really deep into this concept of having a craft. Because it turns out that your craft is really important if you're going to die empty and realize your potential. It's actually difficult to imagine you achieving massive goals without having a craft that you actually master. So let's dig deeper into that topic.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me, Christian. This is very cool. And I'm really excited to find out what a craft is, because I don't really know that yet. So let's just jump right in. Yeah?
Cool. Absolutely, man.
All right. So what is a craft?
So I describe a craft as a collection of activities that is complex for the community and adds value to the community. It sounds a bit complicated, but the whole idea is anything that is complicated, that is most people cannot do, right? So an example would be, let's say martial arts, right? So you're a judo and jiu-jitsu practitioner now. So jiu-jitsu is not easy. Otherwise, most people would be able to do it. So that would be an example of an activity that is complex for the community. And then there's the adds value part to the community. It's complex for the community and adds value to the community. What that means is that it's the sort of thing that people are willing to pay for, either financially or in terms of attention, or maybe in terms of referring you to other people. So in the case of jiu-jitsu, for instance, some people are willing to pay in order to roll with someone on the mat. So it adds value to the community that way. Or perhaps some people are just willing to come and watch you roll on the mat. And some people, if you're really good, will tell their friends about you. So it's a sort of activity that is complex and adds value to the community. So this definition is actually really important because it tells you that certain things, something is not always a craft. For instance, just because something is complicated, if it doesn't help anyone and no one is willing to pay attention to it, then you don't really have a craft. All you have is a complex activity. And the other cool thing about it is that something that was a craft before might not be a craft now. Think about something like typewriting, using a typewriter. So there was a time when few people could use a typewriter. So that was a complex activity. People went to training, and those who could type on a typewriter were considered kind of special and really smart. And it was a sort of activity that was in high demand in the society. So at that time, it was really important stuff. But right now, nobody really needs typewriters. Sure, it might be hard to use it, but it no longer adds value to the community. So it was a craft a couple of years ago. It's no longer a craft now. And there are things that are crafts now that were never crafts before. So a good example would be like computer programming. Imagine if you went back like in the 1500s or 1600s during Da Vinci's time and you talked about writing code. It's complex, sure, but no one's going to pay attention to that. No one's going to pay. They don't know what a freaking computer is. So it wasn't a craft then, but it's a craft now.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. People who have a craft, let's call them craft people, crafts people, they are the ones in society who sort of have a monopoly or control over the skill, right? So at what level do you become a craft person and not just someone dabbling in, let's say, jujitsu or typing or coding? What level of achievement does it take to become a craft person?
Well, so I'd say immediately you start working on a craft, I'd say it's become your craft. The only issue is there are varying degrees of how good you are in a craft. But if you woke up tomorrow and decided, I want to be a mathematician, when you begin working on mathematics, then at that moment, that is your craft. The only question is, how good are you going to become at it? Right? There is no end point, really. There is no point to reach it and say, oh yeah, now I have learned all there is to learn in the craft. That's just not possible. There is always something left to learn. And so, at any stage of the process, you could say it's your craft if it's something you practice. Or you've begun, it doesn't matter when you started, just if it's something you practice or just begun to practice, that is your craft. The question of how good you are at the craft is another question altogether. But ultimately, the power that a craft gives you comes from being far along in the process. So the longer you are in a craft, then the more beneficial, or the more you begin to feel the benefits of having a craft in the society.
Interesting. So I know a lot of people who aren't that interested in mastering any one thing. I know a lot of people who are just interested sort of hanging out and chilling and having a relaxing life where they wake up and do a couple things each day, go to bed, not too much effort. What is the benefit of finding a craft? Because I guess a lot of people, they never find a craft, or they never even want to find a craft. They just dabble in stuff, or they consume media, watch TV, and they never perfect something or even attempt to perfect it. So why should someone want to learn a craft or have a craft or someday master a craft?
So a craft has a lot of benefits. So I'm not going to say that everybody needs a craft. For instance, there are certain people who are genuinely not ambitious. Those people do exist. Of course, this podcast is for people who are ambitious and want to die empty and want to maximize their potential. But there are people who are not ambitious. So for them, picking up a craft might not even be a good idea. It's if you're completely comfortable and you don't feel any regret with sitting in your house, sleeping during the day, playing with the children, smelling the roses, relaxing at the beach. If this is okay for you, then there's no need to do things that are not in line with your interests. If you have no interest in being good and having power and improving and having massive impact on the world, there's nothing wrong with that. And for such people, they don't really need a craft. Actually, a craft will be a source of stress for them, because the truth is that mastering a craft is hard. By definition, when you're working on a craft and you're mastering it, you're dealing with things you can't do well. Right? So if, let's say you want to learn a language, at the beginning you know nothing about the language. So this is really genuinely a hard thing for you. Now, it's sensible to go through the difficulties if this is something that you really want. If you really want what you're going to get as a result of mastering the craft. But if you really have no real reason to learn the language, why the heck would you put yourself through the pain of learning it? So that would be one reason. A craft is not for everybody. The other really important thing to note is that a craft has a lot of benefits. And ultimately, whether or not you pick up a craft and to what degree you progress in the craft is a function of your goals as a person. So, for instance, if you want power, right, many men suffer with the problem of, I don't feel respected by others. If respect is something important, you want people to respect you, then one of the things you could do is just become really good at something. Because it doesn't matter what they think about your fashion, what they think about you. If you're really good at an activity, then they're going to give you a certain level of respect. And in fact, the better you become at something, the more you gain respect from the people in that field and in general from the whole of society. And the other important thing is influence. If you're interested in being an influential person, let's say you want to affect politics, one way you could do it is to actually become a politician. Another way you could do it is become someone like Brad Pitt. Get a craft like, let's say, acting and become really good at it. When you become good at acting, people view you as a master, as a leader. And suddenly you have influence in all spheres of human endeavor. What that means is that, for instance, if Brad Pitt made a political comment, his followers are going to take it seriously. And those who are in a position to actually affect politics directly will trust Brad Pitt's judgment. Not because he's a great politician. I mean, think about it. If Brad Pitt talked about nuclear disarmament, he gave an opinion about nuclear disarmament, people who admire him and how good he is as an actor are going to take his comments seriously. And yet, if you think about it logically, what does acting have to do with nuclear disarmament? Shouldn't you be listening to an expert in nuclear disarmament as opposed to a guy like Brad Pitt? I mean, this is how you logically expect things to work. But the world does not work that way. Once you become a master of a given craft, you gain influence in all these other areas. And so if you're interested in having influence on a massive level, then that's one other reason why you need to master a craft. And there's many other reasons. For instance, you want to learn about yourself. Okay? So there are many ways to know who you are. One way to know who you are is you could go and meditate. That's one way to learn about yourself. Another way is to go and see a psychoanalyst, and then they listen to you and they tell you about your hidden childhood desires and your history and your relationship with your mother. And that's another way to find out about who you are. But there's also another way to really learn about yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your spirit, your essence, is to get a craft, pick any complex task that is useful to the community and try to get good at it. The very process of trying to get good will help you to learn a lot about yourself.
Interesting. So I want to go back to the Brad Pitt analogy. Having a craft that then allows you to attain influence in another sphere that you're interested in. So the reason that speaks to me is right now I'm looking for a job. And for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been doing a lot of neuroscience research. And I would call that my craft. I know at my lab how to clean all of their data, how to collect all of their data. I handle their spreadsheets. I feel good about myself in that context. These past 2 weeks, I've been looking for jobs elsewhere, and I realized that I am nothing anywhere else. Like, there's no job application where I can check off those boxes and people will say, oh, you're a good candidate. So my craft that I've been working on that I feel good about isn't getting me in the door anywhere where I need to get to. And so I know it's not worthless, but it's one of those things where it's like you have a craft in one sphere, and how are you going to leverage that to get into other places? So my question is, I'm interested in counterterrorism and using neuroscience and psychology for that. And so I'm mastering the neuroscience stuff and then trying to leverage it into the world of counterterrorism. Would you say that if someone has a passion, they should pursue a craft that is exactly in line with that passion? You want to become a mathematician, study mathematics starting today? Or do you think that it's worthwhile to find your niche and then sort of master that craft as well as you can and try to leverage it into another area? So let's say you want to be a physicist, but you're really good at the math. So you stick with the math and you say, someday I'll leverage this into the physics that I'd like to do. Do you think that it's better to just go right for it as a relentless man? Or do you think that there's some merit in finding your niche and going for that and then leveraging it into what you want?
Well, ultimately, life is kind of like playing chess, in a sense. It's a strategic mindset. So there is no one tool that works all the time. There is no one answer that works for everybody. Ultimately, it depends on your situation and what you're trying to achieve. So there are a couple of scenarios that happen. Sometimes you have someone who has spent a lot of time in one area that they're good at. Sometimes it happens that someone is good at something, but they don't really enjoy it. It's not a passion of theirs. They've been doing it for 5-6 years, but they don't enjoy it at all. So they've spent these 5-6 years mastering a craft, in the process of mastering a craft that they really don't like. So it's possible to abandon the craft completely and do something that's unrelated. That's one option, and some people do that. Just a while back, I was listening to some guy on the London Real podcast, and the guy is an elite runner. He's a marathon runner, and I think he runs like those ultra marathons. From what he was saying, apparently there's once he ran for 80 hours without sleep, just running, right? So a really powerful guy. But the important thing to note was that up to around 30 or 40, if I get it correctly, he used to be a businessman. He worked at a corporation. And then one day decided, fuck this, I hate this job, I'm going to move into something else. And he was at a bar, actually. Apparently he drank his beer, left it and ran out of the bar, run through the night and run away from his job. And he switched completely careers from this craft of business to something completely different.
You're talking about Dean Karnazes, right?
That is Dean Karnazes. That's right. You know him, huh?
Yeah.
Yes. I just listened to him talk yesterday. The Greek guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he left business and went a completely different path, in this case running. But actually turned out in his case was able to leverage his skills as a business person, because he had to find a way. It's not easy to monetize the sport of running marathons. And so he had to figure out a way to run, do what he likes, but also survive and help his family survive. And so he had to combine business and running. So actually this would be one of those examples where you have a craft. Every craft gives you skills and knowledge. And then you transfer. You don't start from ground zero when you pick up a new activity. You get your knowledge from this one field or craft and you transfer it to another one. That's one way to do it. And actually it's smart to leverage your knowledge. You don't want to put it all to waste. And usually sometimes when we're young, like our age, it's easy to drop something and move. It's easy to change and do something completely different. But certain people have higher responsibilities. For instance, someone has a wife and kids. Then it's not as easy to drop your career and do something else. Maybe you're a lawyer and you freaking hate the law, but you can't just quit and become a dancer, because then your family is going to suffer. So now you want to figure out a way to not waste your skills as a lawyer, the years you spent learning the law, but you still want to engage in music. And maybe you could figure out a way to connect those two. Maybe become a lawyer that deals specifically with musicians. That way you're leveraging your skills, but you're also connecting it to this passion of yours.
Well, so that sort of reminds me of the situation that I have been struggling with, which is when I was 21 or 22. I'm 23 now, so not that long ago.
Hey, same age as me, dude.
I decided that I really wanted to go into counterterrorism or have some effect in that world. But I was like, man, I may have been a sophomore or a junior in college, and I was like, I'm not about to become an Arabic major. I'm not about to become a Middle Eastern Studies major. I've been doing neuroscience research. I've been working with these spreadsheets. Am I really about to just jump ship from all of that knowledge and pick up something totally new? And I decided not to. And sometimes I wonder if I made the right decision or not. But from what you're saying, it sounds like you think that it makes sense once you have something to try to recycle that into what you want to do next.
Yeah, you want to use all the knowledge available to you. It's very possible because if you look at it carefully, all of life is really connected. If you look at, let's say, the things that it takes to be a really good chess player, and you look at the things it takes to be a really good researcher, if you look carefully, the fields look different. One is moving pieces on a board. The other one is doing research and analyzing data. But if you look deeply enough, you find out that the principles are the same. You might find that, for instance, to play chess well, you have to be really focused. It turns out if you want to be a researcher, you also have to be really focused. And the principles that help you to focus in chess, you can transfer them to helping you focus in neuroscience. Because really all of life is connected that way. There are all sorts of things in chess as well. Maybe, what's the other thing in chess? You have to be able to be at home with complexity. When you face a position that's complex and there are many possibilities, you don't want to freak out. You want to remain calm, analyze the situation, and make the most rational decision. Well, that's also the sorts of things you need to do as a researcher. You might be bombarded with tons of details and data, right? Like all sorts of facts and figures, and you don't know how to put them together. The complexity can be overwhelming. But if you learned how to do this in chess, how to deal with complexity, you could transfer those skills to your job as a researcher. But the thing is that this transfer of skills from one field to another is not obvious. If you don't actually consciously think of it, you can actually end up finding yourself, let's say you move from chess to neuroscience and research, let's say as a lab assistant. Now, if you don't actually consciously try to connect these skills from chess, it's possible for you to be struggling in neuroscience research at sorts of things you already know how to do. If only you could look back and check, oh wait, I've been in situations where I'm under a lot of pressure. I was in chess tournaments. How did I deal with that? Oh, nice. I sat calmly. I breathed in and out. I focused on this move. What am I going to do on this move? Well, is there any way I could use that as a lab assistant? Oh yeah, sure. I could breathe in and out now when I'm faced with this overwhelming data. I could think about just this one fact. How am I going to use it? As opposed to the overwhelming ensemble of data that I have in front of me. It's not trivial to make this connection. And that's why it's important to make it conscious.
It's interesting. I'm 100% sure that a lot of people waste a lot of their knowledge and a lot of their skills by not taking a moment to just critically analyze how they could recycle their skills when they're moving into a different area. I bet a lot of people just squander so much good knowledge because they don't take the time to really investigate how it relates to what they're going to do next.
That's right.
That's really sad.
Yes. It's just it's part of being human in a sense. What I mean by that is the world is very complicated. Things are so related and it's hard to make sense of them. So as human beings, we need to create categories. For example, it's hard to study nature as a whole. So we decide there's a field called physics. Here we're going to study bodies in motion and atoms. Then we split up nature again. We fracture it into, this is biology. We are going to study organisms and how they work. This is chemistry. We are going to study chemicals. And this field we are going to call psychology. We are going to study human nature. This is what we do as human beings. Is we get all of reality, we break it up into distinct disciplines, and this enables us to understand the world. There's nothing wrong with this, but it's important that after you've broken down nature and put it in some sort of bucket called physics or economics, it's important to remember to bring those, eventually transcend the buckets and allow information to flow from all those fields and disciplines. Allow reality to be as it is, connected as opposed to fractured and split into pieces.
Do you think that a lot of people essentially fuck themselves over? Am I allowed to say fuck?
Absolutely, man. This is the Relentless Man podcast. Okay. Whatever it takes to get the message across.
Do you think a lot of people fuck themselves over by never looking at the big picture of how their different bases of knowledge connect? So a lot of people who study physics, biology, chemistry, because maybe they're doing pre-med or maybe they're just trying to fill out some science requirements, they might never become the scientists that they could or the thinkers they could because they just think, I gotta finish organic chemistry. I gotta finish physics too. They never say like, wow, these concepts are melding in the interface of chemistry. I imagine that a lot of people just like squander their ability to become great scientists by never making these connections.
That's right. And that doesn't just apply to scientists. It applies to any craftsman you can think of. It's in your best interest to... There's this guy called Charlie Munger. I don't know if you know him. Charlie Munger is Warren Buffett's business partner, has been for years. He's an absolute high achiever, brilliant guy. And I think him and Buffett are basically, arguably, the best investors in human history. At least known human history, okay? Maybe there was some investor in the caveman days that we didn't know about. But as far as we know, these guys are really the best at this. But he has something he talks about, and it's really interesting. He talks about how the world is filled with various disciplines, and every discipline has some big ideas. And that part of what made him successful as a business person was his ability to learn the big ideas in the various disciplines. He learns the main ideas in economics. He learned the main ideas in psychology. He learned ideas in mathematics, in all these different fields. And what that meant was that when he had a problem, he had so many tools with which to tackle the problem. And he has a famous idea he talks about, that to the man with the hammer, every problem is pretty much a nail. So the idea is, if you have only one tool, if, let's say you're just the only thing you know is economics, you're an economist. You're an economist. Do they call them economists? Mm-hmm. Right. So let's say the only tool you have is economic principles. Then when you're faced with a problem, you're going to try to make it economical, when in fact it might not be. It might be something that has more to do with psychology, or you could have understood it better if you understood evolutionary biology and the idea that part of people's behavior is a desire to pass on genes to the next generation. The more buckets, the more big ideas you have in various fields, the better you become. And Charlie Munger actually is pretty interesting, because he was talking about how, as a result of him learning all this information from all these various disciplines, what ended up happening was that sometimes he'd find himself solving problems in a field much faster than the experts in that field. Obviously, the experts didn't like this. How dare you come to my area, come to my discipline, and solve my problems when I can't solve them? This creates envy. But the reason was that, having mastered the tools from so many different fields, he was able to attack any problem with more than just a hammer. He had a hammer, a chainsaw, all the really large toolbox. And that enabled him to see reality much more clearly than most people are able to. Cool, man. So, what other questions you have for me, buddy?
All right. So, just on the subject of craft, what I want you to do is pick one craft person that you really admire, either past or present, and just speak about their craft and talk about, I want you to say, 1, what is their craft? 2, why is it a craft? And 3, why do you think that they exemplify a craft person? Someone who has really, no one can perfect a craft, but someone who is really outstanding in their craft.
All right, I'm going to choose a very cliche example. So,
Stephen Hawking.
Well, I don't know much about Stephen Hawking, but yes, Stephen Hawking is amazing. I was going to choose Albert Einstein instead, because that was like my childhood obsession. Yeah, so everybody basically knows who Einstein is, but he was a physicist. So when I think about why physics is a craft, well, there are really 2 conditions, right? We said that a craft has to be something that's complex. That is something that most people in the community cannot do, or if they can do it, they can't do it well. And the other thing is that it has to add value to the community. That is, people willing to pay for it financially or in terms of attention. So when you look at something like physics, well, we all agree physics is complex. Few people are good at physics. So it's complex for the community. The other thing is that it adds value to the community, because there is a subset of people in the population that spend their time thinking really hard about physics. And also because most of our inventions in society come from breakthroughs in physics. Our mobile phones, our laptops, a lot of them owe their success to developments in quantum mechanics. So physics is indeed a craft. The other thing what was the second question you asked me? You asked me to, describe a craftsperson that I admire. So we talked about how physics is a craft, and why do I admire Albert Einstein as a craftsman. Well, it's really amazing what he did. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with him just because all scientists used to talk about him in awe. And then at freshman year, at the beginning of the semester, they actually made us start physics with special relativity. That was Einstein's theory. And so I had to read this guy. There was a book and I had to read Einstein's theories and try to figure them out, understand them for myself. And I was amazed at how counterintuitive, how brilliant they were. And also because this theory describes how bodies move and how, let's say, a rocket ship would move if it was close to the speed of light. Now, obviously, human beings, we've never been able to make an aircraft on any sort of object that can move at the speed of light. So the fact that a human being could sit down and imagine what that would be like and tell us what that tells us about light, and it turns out that when you do experiments, it actually works, is just mind-blowing. I guess the most mind-blowing thing is this theory of general relativity, because when he came up with special relativity, it was talking about how bodies moving at a constant velocity. Now, it didn't take into account acceleration, and it didn't take into account gravity. So he had to solve the gravity problem. So Einstein sits down, thinks for 10 years, really hard, and then he comes up with this theory of general relativity. And this theory predicts that light bends, and it predicts precisely how much it will bend, and it predicts the motion of Mercury in outer space. The fact that, because Albert Einstein was a theoretical physicist, he didn't do experiments. He sat down somewhere in his room in Germany and thought and did mathematics and was able to predict exactly how light is going to bend, how much it's going to bend, how the planets move. I mean, how Mercury, why its motion is the way it is. It's just unbelievable to me.
So you are right now describing something that I would say could be generalized to the question, like, what's a famous person who's really smart? But I know that you know a lot of biographical information about Einstein. So what makes him a great craft person? What did his approach to his craft look like?
Okay, so I did study Einstein a lot, and so what I could give you is details from what I read. The accuracy, well, it's hard for us to ever know anything 100%, but from everything I've been able to gather, one thing about Einstein was he loved to think visually. That was a major insight, because usually scientists and physicists tend to think in terms of equations. They like to write a lot of complicated algebra and complicate things. But Einstein thought in terms of thought experiments and in terms of pictures. And this was part of the reason why he had so many breakthroughs. The other thing was that he spent a freaking huge amount of time doing physics. It's estimated to become really good at any field, it takes at least 10,000 hours. Now, we don't know whether the number is exactly accurate, but I mean, if you calculate it, it goes to about at least 3 hours every day of doing an activity for a period of 10 years. Einstein did obviously much more than that. And that sort of dedication is amazing. Another thing that distinguishes Einstein as a craftsperson is the fact that his focus on simplicity. Usually, if you've ever taken a physics class or a math class, then you know how they tend to complicate things. I've noticed many times where the professor uses complex equations and weird formulations and formalisms to explain something that is so easy and something that you actually didn't need that much machinery in order to explain. Well, Einstein was the absolute master at this. His theory of special relativity, a theory that explains how objects move in space at constant velocity, it was based on just two founding principles, what are called the postulates. Two postulates, and you're able to derive how objects move at a constant speed. And that's just brilliant and mind-boggling, because if you can get an entire powerful theory that explains space and time and base it on a few principles, then you've really understood it. And that is rare, to find someone who can explain something so complex in a simple way. Those are some of the greatest strengths of and amazing things about Albert Einstein as a craftsperson.
So let me just run back this list, because you named three things. And what I want to do is figure out if we can generalize this to me.
Okay.
Like,
Connected to all of nature. Good.
screw your audience who are going to be listening to this, but I want advice. And maybe,
Screw you, audience member.
Maybe they'll learn something from it. So you said think visually is one of the things that he did that was special. It made him unique amongst, let's say, a majority of physicists, is his tendency to think almost purely visually. And so I view that as like your special approach. Like, find your special approach that you can take to whatever your craft is. The second thing was dedication, spending a ton of time doing it. So those are the two of the foundations. And then the third is, you said simplicity. So I wonder how we could generalize that. I mean, simplicity came from mastery. Yeah. But then simplicity, I guess it comes from knowing the subject so well at a certain point that it becomes simple knowledge to you. And then for me, I could teach someone to spell cat, but I couldn't possibly teach them, let's say, topology. But that's because, I mean, a baby can't teach me to spell cat before they learn it. So once you truly master that concept, you can move into the realm of simplicity. Would you say that everyone should be looking for a craft that fits with their special approach? So Einstein did physics and he thought visually, but maybe someone has a special relationship to sound and they could find something that fits that niche. Do you think that people should try and leverage that special thing about them and find the craft that allows them to blossom?
Yeah, there are a couple of things there. So, in terms of picking a craft, ultimately it depends on your goals. But usually, a rule of thumb is to look at things that you're naturally good at, and everybody has them. You might have a good voice, or you might just be physically attractive. Then you want to leverage your physical attractiveness somehow. Find a career or sort of craft where being good looking is an advantage. Being good looking might not help you much if you want to be a physicist. People, okay, maybe they'll associate you with good things, but if you don't know your physics, then all your good looks count for nothing in that world. But if you're a model, then being beautiful and looking good is really important. If you're an actor, then it's really important. So if you're picking a craft, it's a recommended course of action that you pick a craft that uses your natural advantages and abilities. Things that come more naturally. Some people refer to it as talent, and everybody actually has a version of that. You know, if you're really tall, there are activities for which being tall is an advantage. If you're really short, there are activities for which being short is an advantage. You might have an easier time becoming a gymnast if you're short. If you're really tall, you might have an easier time becoming a basketball player. So that's definitely one important thing. But ultimately, it's important that you don't get stuck on this one way of doing things. Because there are situations where there are certain people who actually pick a craft for which they're completely weak. And that turns out to be how they do it. Because it's important to them, for instance, to be able to overcome their weaknesses. That's part of the joy they get from doing things. And so taking something that they're not good at all and becoming a master at it is exciting to them, because they can say, look where I started. I was actually shorter than the average height of a basketball player, but I still dominated. You know, that some people, they like that. And for some people, that's the right course of action. So you want to think like a chess player here. You have a situation, you have goals, whatever tools and way of thinking help you to get there, that's what you're going to do. So if picking a craft that maximizes your strengths is what, according to your thinking, seems to be the right strategy, then do that. Otherwise, don't do it. Now, you mentioned some other things about simplicity, so I want to get back to that. So, we're talking about Einstein and how the reason he was able to explain things simply was because he was a master and really good at the field. So, it actually turns out that there are like many masters out there, but it's a different thing knowing your stuff and then explaining it in a simple way. Those are actually two different skill sets. There are a lot of really brilliant scientists, brilliant physicists, caliber of Einstein, but they can't explain for shit. Basically, they just can't put the ideas in a way that other people can understand. So it's not like an automatic thing you get if you become really good at a field. That's why we value teachers, really good ones, because it's rare to find the sort of person that can take a complex idea and explain it. And in a sense, it is right. A person who's able to explain an idea so simply, that's kind of proof that they really know their stuff. That's definitely important. And then talking about the issue of generalizing pictures. So we said that Einstein thought in pictures, and he was the sort of person who liked to do thought experiments. That really translates to intuition, is really what it is. If you think about it, is when you're working with pictures, you're not focusing on the specific equations and details. All you're focusing on is the big picture, the main concepts. Once you've dealt with those, then you deal with the details, the actual equations. That's important for almost any craft you can think of. It's kind of, think about an artist, someone who's drawing. So, if you're trying to draw a person, normally you don't start by drawing them perfectly. Shading the hair at the beginning, shading the nose, the eyes, everything. No. If you look at a sketch artist, what they do is first they draw the frame. That's the intuitive part, just a rough idea. He's saying approximately this is what the head should look like, this is what the ears should look like. It's kind of like Einstein saying approximately this is how nature should work, according to this thought experiment and picture. And once he's done the rough frame, then he can hone in on the details. Oh wow, this is how the hair should be shaped. This is the color. Oh wow, this eye should be more towards this direction. And then eventually when it's done, you see, as far as you're concerned, a perfect representation of a human being on a piece of paper. And as far as physicists are concerned, a perfect capturing of nature in terms of equations. But he didn't start with the details. He started with the big idea and the intuition. That's something people can take and apply in all sorts of crafts.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Christian, for letting me know what's up with craft.
Oh man, no, this was a lot of fun. You have great questions, and yeah, crafts turn out to be really important. Mm-hmm. So if you're an audience member and you're ambitious and you want to die empty, maximize your potential, then it's hard to envision how you're gonna realize your potential without picking a craft and mastering it. So think really hard, if you don't have a craft already, about finding one and figuring out how to master it. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. If you have any obstacles that you're facing on your path to becoming a master, please email me those obstacles. Thank you very much once again for listening, and hope to see you later.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye.